Good morning, 9:30 callers. I'm coming to you live from the corner of Beacon Street. No, Calm Ave and Arlington Street. A little bit of traffic here this morning. But Neri is here, my co-host for the thank you so much, Neri. And Hopeton, it's so great to see you. So Hopeton, our first question for all 9:30 callers is for folks to tell us about you and how you came to be in your current role. And Hopeton is usually on the West Coast, but we are so happy he's on the East Coast. So it was 9:30 his time and not 6:30 in the morning. So Hopeton, I will turn things over to you. And then we're so excited to hear about the toolkit.
Yeah, yeah, well, great to be in the space with everyone. Yeah, happy to be here at the 9:30 call, or like Amy said, typically for me it would be the 6:30 call. Um, so how did I come to be in this space? I think the quickest, I'll try to make this fairly quick. So I used to be a sixth grade teacher in Phoenix, Arizona. I went to get my bachelor's in elementary education. I always wanted to be a sixth grade teacher. Was making about $1,800 a month, paying like $900 in rent. So it wasn't really sustainable. Um, Although I love being a teacher, I basically, I mean, had to leave. I mean, I could have stuck around, but I don't think it wasn't feasible. So I went back to school, uh, first to get a bachelor's in political science, because during my time as a teacher, I realized very quickly that the decisions in education were made by people who weren't in education. I wanted to learn a little bit more about politics and like the ways of people in politics. And then I got a second bachelor's and I got a master's in educational policy. During that time, I learned a lot of things. Was exposed to uh, critical race theory, like the actual critical race theory. So this was in 2017, the actual critical race theory and understanding intersectionality and understanding all these different things in addition to like policies in education, learning about research. And I became a researcher and was working at a different research firm for a little bit and actually applied to CSCCE where I'm at now and was initially not I didn't get the job the first time. Uh, yeah, so but our former executive director, Dr. Lee Austin, I don't know if she's on the call, but she had encouraged that I reach out again. So I reached out like a year later. I had already moved to the Bay Area, was working at a different research firm. I reached out a year later, and here I am. And I think what drew me to CSCCE is kind of uh, the understanding that I'd had in from my experience as a sixth grade teacher, and from learning in the literature and the theories and the understanding of like the ECU workforce, what the workforce is facing, just put a lot of I was able to use like a lot of what I was learning and apply it to the ECE workforce, which is a very different workforce than the K through 12 space. But even as a teacher myself, we had preschool teachers on campus, and I never realized that
Mm.
there could be a situation where they were making even less than what I was making, which, like I said, was only $1,800 a month. So yeah, I think CSCCE, like when I CSCCE and the application to CSCCE the first time introduced me to the EC workforce. Um, and then just allowed me to apply, like I said, the critical race theory lens, like all these other types of like understanding of intersectionality, all these things to the actual ECE workforce. So yeah, I've been here now my at the end of my fifth year. Um, yep.
It's amazing, Hopeton. I've known you and worked with you, but I don't think I ever knew your whole story. So that's why we love this question, the 9:30 call. And we were so grateful to work with Dr. Leah Austin and the team. Over the years, you have been such an incredible resource for organizations like Strategies for Children, but also just the work that you've done to uplift the early childhood workforce is just, we're so grateful for that. So I did attend the webinar that you guys did a while ago, so I have heard about it, but tell us more about the toolkit.
Yeah, so actually, let me share my screen. I have a small presentation. I'm the type of person who would rather be in conversation than take a whole lot of time to present, but this will kind of help me. Can everyone see my screen? Awesome. So the ECE Justice Toolkit, and I'll try to go through this like fairly briefly, again, so I add some time saved at the end for conversation. Um, Let me see if I can advance my own slides. Okay. So the ECE Justice Toolkit was funded by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation and the Heising Simons Foundation. It was something that was co-authored by Dr. Leah Austin and myself, and we collaborated with Dr. Ashley Williams of Just ECE, Tanya McMillan of Black ECE, Benu Chabra of Bay Area Professional Family Child Care Network, and Dr. Martha Melgoza of Unidos for ECE. Those are all California-based educators that we have worked with in the past and just have a wealth of knowledge. So um, Leah and myself and wrote most of the content that is in the toolkit, worked with others at CSCCE to refine the toolkit, then worked with educators to continue to refine the toolkit because we wanted to make sure that it spoke to the perspectives and experiences of early educators, right? So the purpose of the toolkit itself is to challenge institutionalized oppression, or we think that a toolkit is needed to help to challenge institutionalized oppression that impacts the EC workforce, and hopefully it supports the clear naming of oppressive practices and policies, and a better understanding of who they ultimately serve and harm, and the identification of equitable policy processes and outcomes. And actually, the toolkit itself, not this type of work, started in 2020. So before I was at the center, and if all of you remember way back to 2020, the discourse in politics was a lot of racial injustice discourse, right? And then over time, that shifted dramatically, we would say, right, into this attack on um, anti-wokeness, if you will, right? So we moved through like the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020 to what I mentioned earlier, critical race theory being a part of this like anti-woke movement, even though it's crazy that critical race theory would ever be taught in schools when that's a very academic thing. But anyway, so the justice work goes back before that, but this toolkit came out of that, right? So one of my first things that I did at CSCCE was they had me review the master plan for education in California, right? And this master plan, it talked about, Black Lives Matter and equity and all these things. But as you review the master plan itself, which was a huge document, they never lay out how to actualize equity, justice, any of this stuff, right? So these words end up being just buzzwords, right? So the toolkit came out of that, right? How do we give people something that they can use to analyze policies based off of their specific positionalities, right? So we lay it out for if you are an early educator, all the way up through if you are a researcher, advocate, this is how you could use the toolkit, right? So this is something that it came out of that time. But again, this justice work, it goes well beyond, 2020. I mean, it goes well beyond when the center itself was founded in 1999. So I'll try to talk through what the toolkit looks like again very briefly. We start off with these what if questions. Um, as a way to kind of frame ECE within I would call it like the general ecosystem of like oppression, right? So we kind of, because the toolkit itself isn't designed just for people who are familiar with ECE, we wanted to give people an understanding of ECE, but also be able to situate ECE within this general ecosystem of people facing oppression. So we want to be able to situate early educators within that because at least for my part, kind of what I talked about with how I got here, and granted K through 12 and ECE are very similar, right? Um, I think it's important that people understand that early educators and what early educators experience is part and parcel of what many different people experience in the United States, right? Many people face an oppression. So we wanted to start off with these what if questions that will give the reader an understanding of um, what early educators are facing and maybe where we could go, you know, in a society that is just and equitable. But then on this left-hand side, we kind of talk about what an equitable and just society is, right? So one in which people can participate and prosper, where everyone enjoys dignity, respect, and access to basic human needs such as housing, food, and safety, right? That is something that has not happened historically in the United States, right? The current moment is the current moment, but historically, this part on the left-hand side has never been the case. And of course, it is the case for ECE as well. So we thought it was important to show both of that, right? And then throughout the toolkit, we have just different sections, right? We have, and this isn't in the slides themselves or how do I say this? The images of the sections themselves aren't in the exact order of the toolkit, mostly because some of the section cover pages were easier to fit together on a slide. But either way, the toolkit itself isn't meant to be read or doesn't have to be read from cover to cover in sequence, right? The sections can exist on their own, right? So anyway, we have a purpose of the toolkit. Again, try to lay out like why we have this toolkit, what we're doing this for within the context of ECE, the groundwork for justice, which suggests strategies and actions that groups can work towards for justice for early educators, and provides examples of how the toolkit can be used to analyze policies. So we have specific, more contemporary policies that we've used to we use some of the questions that we've had in the toolkit that I'll show next to kind of analyze to show readers how this type of work can be done, right? Like in terms of policy analysis. Within that section are the 10 questions towards EC justice, right? So these are questions that, again, when I first started at the center, we kind of shaped and used as we were invited into spaces or as we were working on projects and policies. We're talking about equity work, right? So we started shaping these questions as a way to reflect how to understand what a policy looks like and if the policy's goal is equity, justice, insert other type of word here. These questions can kind of help people who analyze policy, and it doesn't even need to be a policy analyst. It can be someone who is not even remotely familiar with policies, interrogate the policies, the core of the policy, and like what it actually serves, right? And then we have practical applications for the 10 questions on the bottom, right? So you can bring these to public comment opportunities or public forums, or even just in groups like the 9:30 call where people are working and gathering around understanding what is going on in EC in a policy space. And then to the bottom right, we have ideas. And again, we didn't want any of this to be prescriptive, right? So these are ideas for how early educators and advocates can use the questions, or how researchers and policy analysts can use the questions. And what we also hope over time with the toolkit is that we hear from people like yourselves. And sorry, I haven't been checking the chat or anything, and I have no idea, to be clear, I have no idea who's in the room. I don't know, and like most of you, but people like yourselves can reach back out to us and tell us how you've used the toolkit, what different ways you've used the toolkit, because we also recognize that, you know, I can say this for myself. I can't say this for Leah because Leah has an incredible wealth of knowledge, but for myself, I I couldn't even imagine the possibilities for something like this, right? Because I'm not in your situation, just like I'm not an early educator, right? So if an early educator picked this up, they could come up with something totally different, and we hope to hear that from people who use the toolkit. Within this, we also have a timeline of federal policies. It's not exhaustive because that would be exhausting, but we have a timeline of federal policies that impact specifically the lives and livelihoods of people of color, women, and early educators. Because again, we want to be able to situate early care and education, ECE, and early educators within this general, again, I'll keep saying, I guess, an ecosystem of oppression, right? That affects people of color and women specifically. So we don't have every single federal policy here, but we try to start towards the founding of what is now known as the United States, all the way up through more recent times. And again, like you'll see here, some of these are general federal policies, right? So we have the 13th and 14th Amendment, all the way to, if you look at the bottom right, the American Rescue Plan Act, right? And the and I'll just note some of these don't have obviously like an explanation, and the hope there is that people continue to do their own research, and also the ones that don't have an explanation here, many of them there is an explanation of the policy later in the toolkit when we talk about the specific historical the history of oppression within the US. Oh, and here we go, the historical context, right? So in this historical context section, we dive deeper on like not only the federal policies, right? So the oppression faced by individuals and communities, but we also make sure that we highlight resistance to that oppression, right? Because it forever, not forever, but since the founding of the United States, people have faced terrible, terrible conditions, and people have resisted these terrible conditions, right? And sometimes what gets lost in the policies, well, sometimes what gets lost in general is that policies are often impacted by people resisting and by collective action, right? And this part of the toolkit tries to highlight some of those examples, right? So not only were people facing terrible and people have been facing terrible conditions, but people haven't passively just faced those terrible conditions and have actually resisted throughout the founding of the United States, right? So we talk all the way through um, colonization, slavery, enslavement, all the way up through the current times. And ECE is situated within this as well, right? And then and again, this isn't in an exact order. We have how to use the toolkit, right? And we have that based off of different positionalities, right? So how anyone can use the toolkit up through how an early educator can use the toolkit, how a researcher can use the toolkit. Um, and again, it's not prescriptive. They're just options, and we hope to continue to learn from others about the ways that they've used the toolkit. And then we end with a moving forward section. I think that's all I have. So I know that was a whole lot in like I don't know, 20-minute span, but yeah, that's all I have, Amy.
Thank you, Hopeton. Melissa added to the chat, policies result from collective action and resistance, a powerful part of the story that is often omitted. Great work. Natalia says, thank you for this amazing work. Where can we access the toolkit after today's session? Will there be a downloadable version and implementation guide available publicly? So can you tell us about this, Hopeton? We know as advocates, and when we spend so much time building these resources, how are you seeing in action?
All right, sorry, I'm gonna stop sharing just so I can see everyone again.
Okay, great.
Um, but so to the where can we access the toolkit? Because I want to get to that question. It's available on the CSCC website, and
I can put the link in while you're
yeah.
talking, Hopeton.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's
Sure.
available on the website, and I forgot to mention this. Um, it's available in English and in Spanish. So yeah, and then Amy, can you repeat your question? Because I was stuck on that one. Uh,
Sure. It was what about like my question was about like we make these incredible resources and then what happens? Like what have you heard seen with implementation? Where have you seen people use it? How's that rollout been?
yeah, so some of the educators that I mentioned at the beginning talked about using it. So the educators that I mentioned at the beginning are part of educator-led like advocacy organizations. And they've talked about using it already within those spaces, right? So within their meeting spaces, um, as a way to just continue to understand like the historical process, right? But also like what is going on right now. Um, and and in the hopes that as policies come out, especially in California, so those educators are all in California, to be able to use like the 10 questions part, just an example to understand and recognize these policies. I do think the part I want to be very like mindful and careful about is most of the educators I've talked to, this isn't new stuff anyway, right?
Right.
So it is a tool, but they're happy that it exists, right? And they're constantly, I think what we want to do is constantly remain in contact with them about how they're using it, right? So it's still fairly new. It just came out in I
Right.
think the webinar was in the end of was that September?
It was
Yeah,
September, it says on
yeah,
the toolkit.
yeah, the end of September. So yeah, it's still fairly new, and we hope to continue to hear from again like people in the room, like how are you using it? Um, how could you see yourself using it? I think that was one of the biggest questions that I would have
Yeah.
wanted to ask, and I know we don't have that much time, but yeah, reach out. I'm very easy to find. My email address is hopeton@berkeley.edu. If you can't remember that, if you go to CSCCE's website, um, you can find me on there. But yeah, it's just my first name at berkeley.edu. Feel free to reach out and yeah, keep me in the loop on how you're using this because again, kind of like what I was saying at the beginning, so much of it, I couldn't even imagine how people end up gathering around it, right?
Right. I think what we have found on the 9:30 call and just in this community is like having conversation starters, having language, having questions is such an important first step, that and like you said, you can't really imagine what could come of it. Don Danette said it should be noted that Hopeton Hess is clearly a superhero name. So I don't know if you've ever had that feedback before. Leslie Baker says this is a first exposure to the toolkit. We will use this tool in our program's continuous improvement um, program. Thanks, Hope, I can't wait to read through the toolkit and the webinar. This is great. Um, and thank you. Arabella is here as well, who we saw last week in Salt Lake City, and appreciation for offering the toolkit in Spanish.
Yeah.
So thank you for that as well. And Hobson, can you just talk little bit about in our 2 minutes left, like how this toolkit and this work is like centered in all the work that you're doing at the center? I think you at the center and the colleagues at the center have covered things like workplace conditions. You kind of have expanded the way that we think about the early childhood workforce. So can you just maybe say a few words about that? Like how does this sit in relation to all the other work you guys are doing?
Yeah, I mean it's core to the founding of the center, right? So when Dr. Marcy Whitebook founded the center after, excuse me, working in the worthy wage movement as an activist and an educator, um, this was a lot of her work and the work of the people that she was working with. So I appreciate the thanks too, but and not to downplay it, but all I really did was and all Leah and I did was we took the work that has been done and we try to put it in a centralized place. So yeah, it's at the core of CSCCE, and ultimately, I think it's a place that CSCCE wants to continue to go.
Yep.
Continuing to make sure that justice and equity work is is the work that we're always doing until we don't need to do it. right? And
Right. Can we
that's
put
the hope,
ourselves out
right?
of business, right? Of the
Yeah.
social justice school.
Yep. That's the hope. That's the hope. So I appreciate it.
Uh, yes, hope, and Donna Danette shares my favorite at first glance is the power of if not, why not?
Hmm.
And Edna shares, thank you. I'm sure many programs, like Leslie mentioned, will be sharing this toolkit. Word of mouth is still very effective. And
Definitely.
just appreciate you joining the 9:30 call. We know this community has responded, and I think even the historical perspective of thinking about COVID in 2020 and where we were and how some of those feelings of thinking about everyone's role right now, and when you think about all the policy change and proposals that are on the table, and just the important work that people are doing every day, interacting with children and families, and really being the hope, which, we need tools too to think about how we can. I love that you said it's all in one place too, because I think that's that's a lot of work. We know there's a lot of stuff out there, so to kind of make it all make sense is really important. Hopeton, please come back anytime to the 9:30 call. It knows all the work that you all are doing at the center. We're so appreciative of it and glad you could join us today.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah, and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Nice to meet you in the virtual space.
And Hopeton, if you can send me the slides, we'll add them to our follow-up folder where we have 5+ years of content from all the 9:30 calls.
Yep, I definitely will.
Great. Thanks so much. And 9:30 callers, it is Thursday, so we will be back on Monday for the 9:30 call. And stay tuned for the email. If you have joined the call and you're not on our email list, you can go to our website and sign up so you get the weekly calendar. Neri, thanks so much. Oh, Linda said, thank you, Hope, and it gives us a ton of hope. I know it's corny. All right, we'll see everybody on Monday morning. Take care.